By the time the dogs started digging up the graves, Waylon Hollow already knew the moon had chosen a side. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children. They whisper them to stay alive. You're listening to Whispering. Narratives where the stories people murmur in the dark aren't entertainment. They're instructions for surviving whatever's listening back. At first it was just sound one long, low howl threading through the hills, answered by something shorter, sharper, like teeth closing on bone. Porch lights flicked on along the single strip of road that called itself Main Street. Screen doors creaked open, then shut. Curtains shifted. Every dog in town went quiet at once, as if a hand had settled over 100 throats. The moon hung too low over the tree line, swollen and yellow, with a faint red bruise at its edge. It didn't look like light. It looked like an eye that hadn't decided who to look at yet. Mara Quinn heard it from her father's old truck, parked at the edge of the cemetery. The engine ticked as it cooled. Her fingers were still wrapped around the steering wheel, knuckles pale, when that second sound came drifting down from the ridge, a growl that wasn't quite canine, carried on the wind like something too tall was pacing the ridgeline above the town. The truck vibrated with it. The rearview mirror shook. Her own breath came out as a quick, white puff in the cold air. She told herself it was just the wind curling around the stones. Just coyotes. Just her imagination. Then the nearest headstone trembled. Soil crumbled and sagged inward at its base, as if something under the ground had shifted. A sharp scrape followed, like claws raking wood from the inside out, and a muffled, choked yelp came from the grave itself. Mara didn't move. She watched as the earth buckled, then split. A dog's muzzle punched up through the sod, teeth snapping at nothing, eyes rolled back white. Another shape thinner, long limb dragged it up the rest of the way, and for 1 second the silhouette stood clear against the wrong-colored moon, too long for a man, too upright for a wolf. The dog hung, limp in one massive hand, muzzle twitching as if waking from a nightmare. The grave sent steam rolled off it in thick clouds. The upright thing lifted its head toward the ridge, where the first howl had come from, and something in the posture set challenge, territory, war. It turned, and its eyes flashed an ugly, unhealthy yellow that seemed to cut right through the windshield and find Mara where she sat. She didn't scream, didn't breathe, didn't blink. The creature tilted its head, listening to something above and behind the town, something in the direction of the old timber road. Then it dropped the dog, slipped back between the stones, and vanished into the tree line, as if the forest had simply decided to reclaim it. The dog wheezed once, shuddered, and staggered to its feet. It shook grave dirt from its fur, tail tucked hard between its legs, then bolted down the hill and into Waylon Hollow, as if something out there was worse than what it had just clawed through to get back. Open graves and waking dogs were not new stories here, but things that pulled them up, things that walked like that. Those were the legends people only whispered when they were sure of the wind was blowing the other way. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children. They whisper them to stay alive. The voice of the hills seemed to say it, with every flickering porch light and every locked kennel door. It was in the way old men at the diner paused mid-sentence whenever a siren wailed in the distance, and in the way that siren always seemed to die before it reached the tree line. Waylon Hollow was the kind of place where every story had teeth, and every warning had a name. They called one of them the Moonborn. They called the other the Ditch Hounds. And when the moon swelled and the ditch water turned black, nobody pretended the stories were just stories. They were instructions. They were the last laws. Mara sat in her father's truck and watched the dog disappear between the houses, its paws skidding on cracked pavement. The moon's light made its fur look slick with oil instead of rain. Her pulse finally let her move. She exhaled hard, eyes burning, and reached for the door handle. The cemetery gate creaked as the wind jostled it. The sound scraped straight down her spine. She stepped out into the cold. Her boots sank a little into the lawn, soft from days of rain. Headstones jutted up like broken teeth. Her father's grave was only 3 days old, the dirt still raw and dark. The bouquet she'd left already bowed in browning. The dog hadn't clawed its way out from his plot. But there were marks on the wood of his temporary cross, pale scars, where something with claws had tested the grain. 3 long gouges, then 3 shorter, deeper ones below, like a smaller set of claws had raked over the first. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. Everybody in Waylon Hollow knew there were 2 kinds of tracks you never wanted to see together. She knelt, fingers hovering over the wood. The marks were fresh. Splinters still clung to the edges. Her father had died of a heart attack, alone in his cabin, or so the sheriff had said. But the longer she looked at the cross, the less those words fit. There was another sound, then a distant, low-pitched howl, longer than the first. Older. The Moonborn. The answer came sharper, higher, from somewhere near the ditch that split the town from the forest. That broken, half-barked cry the older folks called the hound's note. Ditch Hound, werewolf, dogman, cryptid, monster. Every legend had its own shape, its own name. But here, the old ones swore there were not just 1, but 2 lines of teeth out. In those trees' ends, they hated each other more than they hated anything on 2 legs. Her father used to talk about them like weather patterns. Not if. When the moon fattens, watch the ridge. When the dogs go silent, lock the doors. When the ditch water stops moving, don't cross. Not for anything. He'd die with those rules written on a torn envelope by the fridge. She'd thought it was just another one of his hill country routines. Until tonight, a car swished by on the road below, tires hissing on wet asphalt, breaking the moment like a dream. Mara stood, wiped her hands on her jeans, and turned back to the truck. She'd come to Waylon Hollow to bury her father, sell a cabin, and get back out before the past could root too deep. The night had other ideas. It had dragged something up from the dirt, something that walked on 2 legs and dragged dogs from graves, something that had looked directly at her, as if it already knew her name. No one survives the night it chooses, the old women at the store liked to say, tucked between gossip and canned goods. Locals say the moon never glows the same after that night. Mara slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, the sound too small for the weight in her chest. She didn't notice that when she grabbed the steering wheel, her nails left faint, pale crescent marks in the worn leather, or that the bones in her fingers ached as if they were remembering a shape they hadn't yet taken. Behind the town, the forest watched. The next day, Waylon Hollow pretended to be normal. Rain rolled in, off the hills, turning the main road into a ribbon of grey. The diner filled with the scrape of forks and the low buzz of the weather report. Sheriff Cole nursed his coffee at the corner booth, eyes on the door like he always was. Old Mrs. Harrow refilled sugar caddies and pretended not to notice the whispers that turned her way. Mara sat at the counter, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug. The coffee had the taste of burnt earth, but it was warm. "You look like something dug you up," Mrs. Harrow said, her accent softening the eddies of her words. Sleep? Mara had dreamed of dirt in her mouth and a moon pressed against the glass like a watching face. Every time she surfaced from sleep, she'd heard something pacing the tree line behind her father's cabin. Every time she almost opened the curtain, the pacing stopped. "Sure," she said, "like a rock." Mrs. Harrow snorted. "A rock someone dropped off a cliff, maybe. Do you always talk this nice to customers?" Only the ones I knew when they still fit in high chairs. The older woman's eyes soft. You're staying out at your daddy's place, all alone? Just until I get it cleared out, Mara said. Realtors already sniffing around. I won't be long. Across the room, Sheriff Cole glanced up. Won't be long, Mrs. Harrow repeated, like she was tasting the phrase and not entirely liking the flavor. You still remember the rules for this place? Or did the city knock 'em out of your head? Mara managed a half smile. Don't leave food out on the porch. Don't go in the woods drunk. Don't park on the ditch road when the moon's full. Don't let the dogs run after midnight, Mrs. Harrow added. And if you hear 2 howls at once, you get inside and you stay there. The TV above the counter crackled. A local news anchor read some half-hearted story about a possible cryptid encounter in the next county over. Blurry footage of something hunched and massive crossing a road at night, headlights flaring over fur and a half-turned eye. The caption read, "Unknown animal or hoax." The anchor smiled like she didn't believe a word of it. In Waylon Hollow, nobody smiled at that kind of footage. They leaned a little closer. That's close, someone murmured at one of the back tables. Too close, another replied. Sheriff Cole lowered his cup. Turn that off, he told the room in general. No one moved. You hear me? His voice had the crack of a breaking branch. We don't go inviting stories into town when we already got more than enough. Mara's skin prickled. It wasn't just the sheriff's tone. It was the smell. Burnt coffee, grease, rain, the faint temps of wet dog from someone's jeans, and under it all, something metallic and sour, like old blood drying on fur. The scent seemed to coil around her, tugging at some deep, coiled instinct. Her tongue felt heavier in her mouth. Her teeth tingled like they were pushing at her gums. She set the cup down carefully. You all right, sugar? Mrs. Harrow asked. Yeah, Mara lied. Just tired. The bell over the door jingled. A man stepped in, shaking water from his jacket. He was tall, with an angular face and eyes that didn't seem to settle in one place for long. His beard was more stubble than anything, silver shot through dark hair. He smelled like pine sap, mud, and something that made Mara's muscles tighten, without her permission. Every conversation in the diner dialed itself down a notch. Elias, Shara Cole said, like the name tasted like rust. Didn't know you still came down out of your hole. Had to restart, Elias replied, voice rough, carrying an edge of the hills in it. Salt, rope, bullets, coffee. His gaze slid over the room, landed on Mara for half a heartbeat, then moved on. Town's louder than I remember. Storm will do that, someone muttered. Moon will do that, Elias said. Cole's jaw tightened. You here for a reason besides rattling folks? Elias shrugged one shoulder. Saw something on the ridge last night. Had to check if anyone noticed. Mara's chest went tight. Like that mess they're showing on TV, Mrs. Harrow asked, nodding toward the now muted screen. Worse, Elias said. Whatever that is, it's just someone's Dogman lore gone fuzzy on a camera. What I saw wasn't looking at the road. It was looking at the trees, at the ridge, like it was waiting for something else to show its teeth. Dogman, the word rolled through the room like a pebble starting a landslide. How's the ditch look? Cole asked, too casual. Wrong, Elias replied. Water's gone. Still, smells like something big moved through and didn't bother washing its paws. A fork clinked against a plate. A chair scraped. Someone whispered a prayer under their breath. Open loop 1 was already coiling tighter. Whatever walked the ridge, whoever had clawed Mara's father's cross, whatever had hauled that dog from the dirt, it wasn't alone. It was watching for something else. Moonborn waiting for Ditch Hound, or the other way around. Elias finally let his eyes settle on Mara. "You're Quinn's girl," he said. Mara's spine went colder than the rain. "Was?" she corrected. "He's gone." Elias's gaze flicked, just once, to her hands, to her nails. "Not all the way, maybe." "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped, faster than she meant to. He smiled, but it was a tired, crooked thing with no humor in it. "Means I'm mighty sorry for your loss. And mighty sorrier you came back now, when the last law's about to break." "The last what?" she asked. Nobody answered. There was a rule here. You didn't say some things out loud until the moon was down. That afternoon, Mara drove out to the cabin. The rain thinned to a mist. Trees leaned in close to the narrow road, branches interlocking overhead to form a tunnel that shut out most of the sky. Every now and then, a patch of grey cloud showed through, and behind it, the blurred shape of the waiting moon. Her father's land came up on the right, a rusted mailbox half-eaten by moss, with Quinn hand-painted in flaking black letters. The drive was little more than 2 tire tracks in the mud. The cabin squatted at the top of the rise, logs darkened with age, windows clouded from the inside. It smelled like damp wood, old paper, and something that was almost but not quite animal. Mara stepped out and listened. No birdsong, no wind in the leaves, just the distant, constant sound of the ditch to shallow, undug trench that ran like a scar between the cabin land and the forest. The water should have been moving, whispering over stones. Instead, it lay as flat and dark as glass. She walked to the edge and looked down. The ditch was only 5 feet wide, maybe 3 deep. When she'd been a kid, her father had told her never to cross it when the moon was out. Why? She'd asked, toes dangling into the cool, trickling water. Because on the other side, the rules aren't ours anymore, he'd said. That's where the hounds run, and they don't forget a scent. Today, the stones at the bottom glistened with a thin sheen of slime. Something like a paw print pressed into the muck near the far edge, so large it nearly filled the span between her fingertips. For long toes, thick central pad, and overlaid on top of it, faint but visible, a second print. Different shape, more like a hand, longer fingers, tipped by claws that had left hair-fine cuts in the rock itself. Open loop too. 2 kinds of prints, one crossing into the other's territory. A line stepped over, a rule broken. Her father's cabin door was locked. The key felt too small in her fingers, like she could snap it if she squeezed too hard. She turned it carefully. The cabin air hit her like a physical thing. Dust, pine cleaner, the faint leather and oil smell of her father's old boots. And beneath it all, that same metallic temp she'd scented in the diner. Stronger now, like old blood and wet fur baked into the wood. She moved through the room slowly, as if afraid the walls might flinch away. Photosin frames her as a gap-toothed kid with her father's arm around her shoulders. Him younger, hair thicker, eyes less tired. A newspaper clipping about unexplained livestock killings pinned near the phone, yellowed with age. A hunting rifle on bracket over the fireplace, its barrel clean, the stock worn smooth by use. On the kitchen table lay a map of the hills, paper soft at the creases. The ditch was marked in dark blue ink. Several spots along it had been circled in red. In the margin, in her father's cramped handwriting, someone had written, "Moonborn sign here, hound sign here, never let them over-rep." The circles overlapped near the ridge, near the cemetery, near where Mara had seen the grave split open the night before. Her stomach plunged, something scratched beneath her feet. She froze, palms going damp. The sound came again faint, like claws on concrete, coming from below. The cabin had no basement, at least not one she'd ever been allowed to see. Her father's bedroom floorboards creaked under her weight. The sound led her there, then stopped, as if whatever was beneath had gone still, listening. The rug beside the bed was heavy, braided from old fabric strips. She pushed it aside. A trapdoor lay under it, edges worn. For a long moment, she just stared at it, heart thudding against her ribs, like it was trying to answer some call from below. Then she pulled it open. The smell hit her first. Copper, musk, dirt, a werewolf horror scent, the kind that burlapped itself around old stories, about full moons and cursed bloodlines and things that tore their way out of their own skin to hunt. Concrete steps led down into darkness. A bare bulb hung at the bottom, its pull chains swaying in a breath of air that smelled like cryptid, encounter, and regret. Mara swallowed and descended. The basement was small, square, and cold. Chains bolted to the floor marked a circle in the center. The concrete there was scarred with deep claw marks. Some were wide and heavy, like a massive wolf had thrashed against iron. Others were narrower, cut at a different angle, like something that walked on its hind legs had dragged its nails in slow, thoughtful arcs. On one wall, symbols had been painted in a dark, flaking substance. Some looked like runes, others like crude representations of a moon split by a line, werewolf lore scribbled by a shaky hand. On a table against the far wall lay a notebook. Open Mara flipped through it, hands trembling. Entries back 10 years, notes on moon cycles, on howls heard on specific nights, on livestock found torn but not fully eaten. Words like Dogman or Ditch Hounds, lycanthrope, packlaw, and threaded through it all, another phrase. The war isn't over. It's just quiet tonight. The last law might break. If I don't make it, tell her, tell Mara what she is before they do. The world swam a little. The bulb above her flickered. Something moved in the corner. She spun, heart slamming into her throat. Nothing, just a shadow. Just the shiver of her own breath in the cold. But the shadow had the wrong shape for a human. Broad shoulders, narrow waist, a head that seemed too long, with ears that pricked up as if listening for a sound from far away, a howl or a bark. The bulb steadied, and the shadow smoothed back into the shape of stacked crates and an old coat. Mara shut the notebook and pressed her palm flat against the cool concrete underneath. Faint but undeniable, something answered her touch with a shudder. When she surfaced, dusk had already folded itself over the hills. The moon was higher now, the red bruise deeper, like a fresh wound. The ditch out back lay darker than before. The forest hummed with a tension that wasn't sound but felt like static crawling over her skin. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. She answered anyway. "Hello. You're in his basement," a man's voice said. "Elias ain't you." She turned toward the cabin window automatically, then felt stupid. He couldn't see her. "How do you know that?" "Because the ridge went quiet all at once. Means something important just woke up down in the hollow, and it ain't the hounds." "You find his chains yet?" Mara's gaze slid toward the trapdoor, still open behind her. "You knew about that. Everyone who survived the last time did," Elias said. "Your daddy kept the Moonborn on this side from breaking the last law. Now he's gone, and the hounds are staring up the ditch because they can smell what you are. What I am." Her laugh came out cracked. "I'm a woman cleaning out her dead father's hoarder cabin and trying not to lose her mind." "You're Quinn's blood," Elias said. "And he weren't just some hunter. He was the last chain holder. Last one who could stand on that ditch and make both sides back up." Pause. "You been hearing things sharper? Smelling stuff no one else reacts to? Hands hurting like the bones are too big for your skin?" She thought of the diner, of the way the scent of old blood had wrapped around her of the marks her nails had left on the steering wheel, of the ache in her fingers that had started in the cemetery and hadn't really left. Silence answered him. "That's what I thought," Elias said gently. "You needed to hear it from somebody before the moon tells you itself. You're Moonborn, Mara. Just like him. Just like whoever came before him. Only difference is, your blood got called back here at the same time the hounds decided they're tired of staying on their side. How do you know what they've decided?" She whispered. Elias exhaled, the sound rough. "Because something dragged one out of the ditch last night and chained it in my root cellar. And by the time I got there, the chains were snapped and the walls smelled like grave dirt. They ain't acting alone anymore. Something's calling M, like something else is calling you." Open loop 3 tightened. Who or what was pulling the strings on both sides of this Cryptids War? A howl split the evening, closer than before. Not from the ridge dot, from the yard. Mara's skin crawled with cold sweat. She crossed the floor in 3 strides and peered through the curtain dot in the yard. On her father's side of the ditch, 3 shapes stood. 2 were massive wolves, fur dark as wet bark, shoulders as high as her chest. Their eyes glowed a muted silver blue that caught the moonlight and held it. They paced in a tight circle around the 3rd shape, our rangy, hunched creature cowering near the ditch's edge. The cowering one was wrong. Too tall, but slouched as if it wanted to be on all. Forzan had forgotten how. Its jaws hung open, strings of saliva dangling, tongue lolling. Its eyes were that same ugly yellow she'd seen in the cemetery. The Ditch Hound, the dog, it snarled at the wolves, then flinched back as if expecting teeth. Something like a collar gleamed around its neck, then flickered as it shifted, as if reality itself couldn't quite decide what form that iron should take on this thing's body. One of the Moonborn wolves lifted its head and looked straight at the cabin window at her. The eye contact landed like a hand closing around her heart. Her vision blurred at the edges, sounds sharpened. She heard every drip of water off the eaves, every rustle in the grass, every breath that tore in and out of that dog's ragged lungs. "Elias," she said, voice distant in her own ears. "They're here, on our side, both of them." "Don't go out there," Elias barked. "You hear me? Moon's not full yet, but it's close enough. Your change won't be clean and it won't be kind. You hold the line inside that house until I get the phone cut out." Static hissed in her ear, then went dead. The Moonborn wolf outside moved closer to the door. Her bones ached, every nerve screamed. It wasn't fear, it was something deeper, older recognition. The night always warns you before it wants something. Her father's voice said in her head, memory thick with the smell of wood smoke and whiskey. "You just gotta decide if you're listening." The Moonborn barked, one short, sharp, commanding. The dog flinched, then snarled, eyes rolling. The war that had been held at the edge of town for generations was stepping into her yard, because the last law that kept it out had died 3 days ago and been put in the ground, with a man whose blood was in her veins. Mara opened the door. The cold outside hit her harder than any fist. The wolves turned toward her as one, their fur rippling. The dog's head jerked, lips peeling back from too many teeth. For a moment, everything held. Trees, mist, breath. Then one of the wolves stepped forward. Up close, she could see the wrongness in its perfection. It was too smooth, too deliberate, every muscle built for a werewolf attack, every line of its body honed for speed and tearing. Its eyes, though, were tired, ancient. It sniffed the air near her, then huffed, hot breath, blowing her hair back. It smelled like forest and blood and fur, and something that felt like the ghost of her father's embrace had pressed its forehead gently to hers. Images slammed into her tangled senses like a supernatural horror slideshow. Moonlight on chains. Her father, eyes yellow, standing in this yard, holding his own monstrous shape back with sheer will as Ditch Hound snarled across the ditch. A dozen unseen, howling shapes in the forest, waiting for his signal. The last law, as long as the chain holder stands. The war doesn't cross. Then a final flash, a father alone, clutching his chest, falling. The chains cold on empty concrete as two sets of tracks overlapped in the ditch. The wolf pulled back, the filth pulled back. The dog lunged, not at her. At the wolf it hit with a sound like a car crash. Jaws closing on the Moonborn's shoulder. Flesh tore with a wet rip. The wolf howled, a raw, soul-deep sound that vibrated her teeth. The second wolf launched in, teeth bared, claws slashing. The dog moved like a shadow, jerky and wrong, snapping, twisting, its limbs bending at angles that made Mara's stomach knot. Its movements were chaos, where the wolves were precision. They weren't just monsters. They were two armies that had met at the border for longer than humans had words for. And tonight, something had given one of them permission to cheat. The dog broke from the melee and bolted toward the ditch. It didn't jump across. It walked into the dark, water like a man stepping through a doorway. Ripples spread too slowly. The water around its legs went blacker than the trench itself. For a heartbeat, its yellow eyes fixed on Mara. Then it was gone. The water stilled. The wolves panted, blood steaming from their wounds. Mara staggered back inside and slammed the door. She didn't lock it. Locks were for things with hands that respected doors. Her hands shook, her shoulders burned. Her teeth felt like they were shifting in her skull. In the reflection of the kitchen window, her eyes looked wrong pale, catching the light like an animal's. Asked the locals about that night. Her father's voice whispered in memory. They'll look away before answering. The last law had broken in her yard. The war had slipped into the water, and something in her bones was howling to answer both sides. Night came down like a dropped curtain. Clouds shredded around the rising moon, revealing its full, bloated face. The red bruise had spread, bleeding across its surface. From the ridge, a chorus of howls rose, some long and mournful, some short and frenzied. Moonborn and Ditch Hounds calling to each other across the forest, calling her. Elias arrived near midnight. His truck's headlights cut cruel lines through the trees, then died. He stepped out with his rifle and a grin set to his jaw. "You let MCU?" he asked, even before he reached the porch. "They found me," Mara said. "One of the dogs crossed on our side. Went back through the ditch like it was nothing. Then it started," Elias muttered. "God help us. The war's back on, and this time we ain't got a chain holder. Just a half-turned Moonborn who still thinks she's human." She bristled. "I didn't ask for any of this." "Neither did your line," he said. "They got picked, marked, cursed, whatever word makes you sleep worst at night. But the fact stands. When the Moonborn and the hounds go at it, the ground between them gets shredded. That ground is us, our homes, our graveyards, our kids." He jerked his head toward the ditch. "They're testing borders, looking for a weak point, and you glow like bait to both sides." "How do I stop it?" she asked. "Tell me there's a way." He hesitated. "There is," he said slowly, "but it ain't pretty. Your daddy stood here in his own skin and could still push 'em back. You ain't him. If you stand between them tonight as you are, they'll tear you apart. Only thing they respect is their own. You want to make 'em listen? You gotta be more Moonborn than woman when the war hits the ridge." Her stomach turned over. "You're saying I have to change?" The word felt too small for what he meant. I'm saying the full moon will drag it out of you anyway, Elias replied. You either ride it and steer the teeth where they need to go, or you let it ride you and hope you wake up in a town that still has a name on a map. From the forest came a noise like 1,000 bodies shifting in unison. Leaves shivered, branches creaked. The air thickened with the smell of wet fur and hot breath. Mara stepped to the edge of the ditch. The water had started to move again. Against the current, it rippled inward toward a point somewhere deep under the ridge, like everything was being pulled toward an unseen drain. Long time ago, Elias said, standing at her shoulder, the Moonborn decided they'd keep their hunts on this side, the hounds on that. They carved it into the rock. The ditch is the line. Only ones allowed to cross with a chain holder shore line. They were judges, executioners when they needed to be. They carried the curse and the authority both. And now, she asked. Now the last judge is in the ground, Elias said, and the sentence is come and due with no one to read it. The first shapes emerged at the tree line. Werewolves, not movie monsters, not rubber suit nightmares. They moved with a fluent, terrifying grace. Their bodies the seamless fusion of wolf and mandage, 2 greyed legs, coiled for speed. Arms corded with muscle, muzzles too long and too full of teeth. Fur shone silver, black, and ash, each one bearing scars of old werewolf attacks and cryptid battles. Their eyes all held that same light moon silver, knowing, behind them, in the shadows between the trunks, hunched figures skulked, the dogs, the ditch hounds. Their shapes seemed to crawl in and out of focus, sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes on 2, sometimes in a crouch that suggested both at once. Their eyes burned that sickly yellow, hungry and hateful. They spread out along the ridge, facing each other across the ditch. The battlefield had been chosen. Mara felt her heart slam against her ribs. Whatever you do, Elias said softly, don't run. Her muscles wanted to. Every instinct screamed to get small, get away, get anywhere but here. Another instinct told her, deeper, wanted to run the other way, wanted to leap across the ditch and rip and tear and howl until nothing there could threaten what stood behind her. Her hands clenched, nails bit into her palms, warmth slid down her fingers where skin broke. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Each exhale steamed in the cold air. She blinked, her vision sharpened. She could see individual drops of water clinging to the fur on the nearest Moonborn, could count the scars along its flank, could watch the twitch of its ears as it listened to a sound far beyond human hearing. She could hear it too, now. A heartbeat, not hers, not Elias's. Something massive walking under the earth, under the ditch, under the hollow. The true cause of the bruise on the moon, the true caller of the war. The Moonborn pack threw their heads back and howled. The sound cracked the guide out. It wasn't just rage, it was grief. It was a cursed bloodline screaming that it had been pushed too far again and again. The hounds answered with a ragged, vicious chorus that scraped like claws down bone. Emotions surged through her in waves to her, sorrow, fury. Her skin felt too tight, her teeth ached. Her bones moved. It started as a deep, grinding pressure along her spine, like a hand pressing her vertebrae into a different alignment. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the ditch's edge, her fingers elongated, tendons humming. Nails darkened, thickened, curving as claws grew from beneath them, pushing the weak human keratin out of the way. She heard her ribs creak as her chest expanded, muscles surging under her skin. Hair pushed through pores along her arms, shoulders, back. Easy, Elias said, voice shaking. Ride it, don't fight it. If you fight, it'll tear you in half. She screamed. It came out wrong, too deep, too raw, halfway between a human shout and an animal's roar. Her jaw stretched, bones grinding, teeth lengthening, rearranging themselves into a predator's map. She dropped onto all fours, then onto her knuckles as her hands refused to stay human. Her spine arched, lengthening, a tail budding and unfurling, behind her like a living whip of muscle and fur. Pain blurred into something else, into clarity. The world snapped into perfect focus. The forest was a symphony of smells, old blood, fresh anger, the cold iron temp of the ditch, the hot breathy stench of the hounds, the sharp ozone scent of something supernatural pushing through the cracks. Between worlds, her reflection in the ditch water showed her a stranger, not fully beast, not fully woman. The in-between state, that horrible fulcrum where identity trembles, transformation, addict heaven, human nightmare. The Moonborn on the ridge fell silent when they saw her. The hounds snarled, hackles spiking. She stood, taller now, curved legs ending in paws that could grip mud and stone alike. Her hands were half paws, half hands, claws glinting. Her muzzle was shorter than the others, her eyes a brighter, fiercer silver dot chain, dash holder dot judge. The war's missing piece had finally stepped onto the board from beneath the ditch. The great heartbeat surged upward, the ground cracked. Something colossal rose between the two lines of monsterosa, shape built of shadow and root and bone, the memory of every kill ever made on this ground woven into one towering spectre. It had too many eyes, each one a tiny, blood-red moon. Its mouth was a vertical tear, lined with teeth from every predator that had ever fed in these woods. It was the war itself. Given form, this was Open Loop 3's answer, not some individual mastermind, but an old, hungry pattern that had been fed for centuries. Humans had called some of its manifestations cryptids, some demons, some old gods. Here, it was simply the between dot. It leaned over the ditch, its presence pressing on Mara's shoulders like the sky itself. Its voice was not a sound, but a pressure behind her teeth. Choose, it said. Which side stands? Which side feeds? Which side owns the night? Every eye on her, Moonborn, panting, hackles high, muscles coiled, hounds twitching, slavering, tails thrashing. Elias, a tiny, trembling figure at the cabin's edge, gun useless against the scale of horror. Mara's heart beat once, twice. She thought of her father, standing on this line night after night, holding both sides back with nothing but his curse and his will. She thought of grave dirt forced open by a thing that walked wrong, of a dog pulled up into a war it had never asked to fight. She thought of Waylon Hollow, with its chipped mugs and cracked jokes and people who locked their doors not because they trusted locks, but because they honored the ritual. The war wanted a choice. She gave it one. She threw back her head and howled. It was not a Moonborn howl or a hound's shriek. It was something new. It carried human grief and wolf fury and something like pity for both sets of teeth. It shook the branches. It made the betweens' many eyes blink, just once, as if surprised. The Moonborn flinched. The hounds snapped their jaws shut. Mid-dash snarl, the ditch water boiled. The last law her father had written is mercy. Mara dropped into a crouch and raked her claws across the ditch's edge. Sparks flew where she struck stone. The old markings carved centuries ago glowed, then shattered, lines of power snapping like old wire. The war roared, that pressure slamming into her chest. Choose, it demanded again. I choose neither, she snarled, voice rough, words warped by a muzzle, but still there. You don't get to use us anymore. She leapt not into the Moonborn ranks, not into the hounds, into the between. Her claws sank into its shadow flush like it was cold mud. Its many mouths shrieked, teeth grinding against her fur. It tried to wrap around her, to smother her, to pull her bones out through her pores. She tore every kill, every bite, every scream it had ever. Hell flashed through her as she ripped it apart from the inside. Wolves tearing elk, hounds dragging down deer, Moonborn tearing into hounds, hounds ripping throats out of sleeping sheep. She saw generations of war, all for this thing's hunger. No more. She howled, ripping a heart made of tangled roots and bones from its core. The heart beat once, twice, then crumbled to ash dot that between collapsed, its outline dissolving into a storm of black leaves that whirled up, and vanished into the red bruise on the moon. Silence, then chaos. The hounds howled in ragged terror, their formation shredding as they broke for the ditch. But the water no longer welcomed them like a door. It surged, frothing, throwing them back. One by one, they hit the bank, slid, and scrambled into the trees, vanishing into the deeper dark. Their yellow eyes winked out. The Moonborn stared at Mara. One stepped forward, the scarred one from before, the one that had touched its forehead to hers. It bowed, the others followed. Then, in a flurry of fur and motion, they turned and ran out toward the town, but deeper, into the ridge, their howls fading into the mountains. The war had lost its general. Without thee betwixt a drink, their hatred and feed it back, doubled. Their ancient feud felt suddenly small. Just predators fighting over land, not puppets on a blood-soaked string. Mara stood on the torn ground between the ditch and the trees, chest heaving. Her body trembled, fur receded, bones cracked and shrank. Claws retracted, her muzzle shortened, teeth pulling back to human size with a sickening series of pops. She fell to her knees, naked, skin slick with sweat and streaked with dirt and ash. Elias ran to her and flung his coat around her shoulders. The moon above them had changed. The red bruise was gone. It shone clean and hard and distant, like it had finally pulled its gaze away from Waylon Hollow and taken its unblinking attention elsewhere. You did it? Elias whispered. God, help us. You actually did it. Did I? She rasped. He gestured around. The ditch still ran black, but the water moved naturally now, whispering over stones. The tension in the air had cracked and drained away. The forest smelled of rain and broken branches and the fading trail of cryptids that had decided, for tonight at least, that there were better places to run. The war's over, he said. All paused, long enough for this town to remember how to sleep. Mara looked down at her own hands. They were human again, but faint white crescents lined her palms where claws had pushed through. These won't ever leave, Elias said. Neither will what's inside you. You ain't free of the curse, just in charge of it, in a way your daddy never got to be. She closed her fingers slowly. Ask the locals about that night, she thought. They'll look away before answering. Some of them, anyway. Others would look up at the ridge and remember a new story. The night the war itself died between the ditch and the forest, ripped apart by a chain holder who refused to pick a side. Weeks later, when the footage started leaking, online blurry night vision clips of hulking shapes on the ridge, a woman's distorted howl that sounded nothing like any coyote, strange shadows rising from the ditch. Like smoke, people argued about it in the comments. CRYPTID encounter, hoax, supernatural horror masterpiece, viral marketing. The folks in Waylon Hollow didn't argue. They watched the clips with the sound off, lips pressed tight, eyes flicking to the window every time a dog barked. Locals say the moon never glows the same after that night, the narrator of one compilation video intoned. If this reminds you of something you've heard, you're not alone. Mara sat on her father's porch and listened to the woods breathe. Sometimes, on the farthest ridge, She heard a single, distant howl, not challenge, not hunger, just acknowledgement. She tilted her head back and let the moonlight touch her face. Inside her, something old and sharp turned its head, sniffed at the night, and lay back down. The legends in towns like this don't end. When the war does, they just change shape. It's up to the ones who survive to decide whether the next shape has teeth. And if you're still hearing this, if the hairs on your arms are up and you can't quite shake the feeling that something is listening over your shoulder, then the night hasn't let you go yet. Stories like this leave marks, even if you never see the claws. If you've ever heard two howls at once and known, deep down, that they weren't calling the same thing, leave a word somewhere below in the dark. Warn someone who still thinks the ditch by their house is just a ditch, and the woods behind their town are just trees. If you feel that old hunger in your bones when the full moon climbs, and the dogs in your neighborhood go quiet all at once, stay close to the places where stories gather. Mark your place by the fire before the next full moon, because some wars end, others just wait for the right blood to come home. If you're still here, the night hasn't finished with you yet. Waylon Hollow is just one town, on just one ridge, but every place has its own ditch, its own dogs that go quiet, its own moon that looks a little too red on certain nights. If you've ever heard two howls at once and knew they weren't calling the same thing, tell your story below. Someone else might need that warning before their next war begins. This was Whispering Narratives. Mark your place in the pack, stay close to the fire, and subscribe before the next full moon.